My neighbor claimed I damaged his fence and demanded $20,000. In court, he shouted, "She's a liar." The judge asked if I had any proof. I played a video showing him destroying the fence himself. The entire courtroom turned to him as he tried to slip out the door. I never thought I'd find myself in a courtroom over something as stupid as a fence. But here I am, about to tell you how my neighbor tried to scam me for 20 grand, dragged me into a legal battle, and then got absolutely humiliated in front of a judge. And the best part? I didn't even have to argue. All I did was press play on a security video. The beginning of the nightmare. I've lived in my house for almost 20 years. It's in a quiet New Jersey suburb, nothing fancy, just a typical neighborhood where people mostly mind their own business. I keep to myself, I mow my lawn, I pay my taxes. Life was good. Then Carl moved in. From the start, Carl was a walking red flag. He was one of those people who had a problem with everything. If a leaf from my tree blew into his yard, he'd complain. If I parked too close to the curb, he'd complain. If my dog barked for even 2 seconds, he'd complain. The guy was obsessed with nitpicking. But I ignored him. It wasn't worth the fight. Until he decided that I owed him $20,000. The fence incident. One morning, I walked out into my backyard and noticed something weird. Carl's wooden privacy fence had collapsed. This wasn't some little picket fence. It was 6 feet tall, heavy, and ran the length of our property line. And now, it was completely on the ground. I stared at it for a second, sighed, and thought, well, that sucks for him. Then I went back inside. A few hours later, Carl was banging on my door. Not knocking, banging. I opened it to find him standing there, red-faced and furious. "Carl, you're paying for my fence." "Me, excuse me?" "Carl, don't play dumb. You knocked it over. You damaged it. It's going to cost at least $20,000 to replace." I actually laughed. "Me, Carl, I didn't touch your fence." "Carl, then how did it fall?" "Fences don't just collapse on their own." I pointed at the sky. It had been storming all week. Heavy rain, strong winds. It was obvious what had happened. "Me, maybe your fence wasn't built well. Maybe the wind knocked it over." "Carl, bull asterisk asterisk. This was no accident. You broke it." I was done. I told him he was insane and shut the door in his face. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The harassment begins. For the next few weeks, Carl would not let it go. He'd bring it up every time he saw me. If I was getting the mail, he'd yell from his porch. If I was walking my dog, he'd follow me along the sidewalk, ranting about how I needed to take responsibility. He even tried to get other neighbors involved, but they all knew he was full of it. Then he took it a step further. One morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. It was from a law firm. Carl had hired a lawyer and was suing me for $20,000. I was stunned. This man had no proof, no evidence, not a single reason to believe I had anything to do with his fence falling. And yet, there I was, staring at legal documents demanding money for property damage. I was furious. But I also knew something Carl didn't. I had security cameras. Gathering evidence. I have 2 security cameras, one in my backyard, facing the side of my house, and one pointing toward my driveway. Unfortunately, neither of them was aimed directly at the fence. I checked the footage anyway. Nothing. I asked a few neighbors if they had Ring cameras that might have caught something. No luck. Then I remembered, George. George lives 2 houses down. He's retired, spends all day working on his yard, and recently installed a whole security system with multiple cameras. I called him up and asked if he had any footage of Carl's fence falling. George just grinned. "Oh, I've got something all right. You're gonna love this. The smoking gun." George pulled up the footage and there it was. At 2:38 a.m., Carl walked into his own backyard. He had a crowbar in his hand. And he started prying at his own fence. I watched in disbelief as Carl pulled and kicked at the wooden panels, breaking them apart himself. It took him about 15 minutes to completely destroy his own fence. Then, like a complete idiot, he stood there for a few seconds, staring at the damage, probably admiring his handiwork. Then he walked back inside like nothing happened. I had him. Courtroom showdown. The day of the court hearing came. Carl walked in looking smug. He had a folder full of fake evidence, photos that supposedly showed damage caused by me. They made 0 sense, a few blurry pictures of my car, some random scratches on the wood. Then it was my turn. Judge, do you have any evidence that you did not damage the fence? Me, yes, Your Honor. I have video proof. Carl's face drained of color. I connected my laptop to the courtroom screen and pressed play. There, in perfect night vision, was Carl, destroying his own fence. The courtroom was dead silent. Then, someone gasped. Carl's lawyer turned to him and whispered something. Carl started sweating. Then, in a blind panic, Carl jumped to his feet and started shouting. Carl, she's a liar. That video is fake. It's edited. The judge didn't even blink. Judge, sir, this video has a timestamp. It was taken from a neighbor's security camera. Carl, no. She's framing me. Judge, with footage from another neighbor's house? Carl opened and closed his mouth like a fish. He had nothing. Then, he tried to leave. He stood up and walked toward the door like he could just escape. A bailiff stepped in front of him. Carl froze. The entire courtroom was staring at him. And that's where I'll leave it for now. Carl froze mid-step, caught like a rat in a trap. The bailiff didn't touch him, but he didn't need to. The whole room was watching, waiting. He looked at the judge. Looked at his lawyer. Looked at me. Then, like a complete coward, he sat back down. The judge's decision, but not the end. The judge exhaled loudly, rubbing his temples. Judge, well. That was enlightening. Carl's lawyer, a sweaty guy in an oversized suit, looked furious. He leaned over and whispered something to Carl, probably asking if he had lost his mind. Then the judge turned back to me. Judge, I don't see any reason to continue this trial. The defendant, he nodded at me, is not responsible for any damages. Then he turned to Carl. Judge, Mr. Reynolds, not only is your claim entirely false, but you have wasted this court's time. Carl's face twitched. His lawyer was slowly gathering his papers, probably wishing he had never taken this case. Judge, since the defendant had to spend time and money fighting a baseless lawsuit, I am ordering you to cover her legal fees. Carl's mouth dropped open. Carl, you can't do that. Judge, I just did. Carl slammed his hands on the table, making everyone flinch. Carl, this isn't fair. Judge, you may also be facing charges for filing a fraudulent lawsuit. Carl went dead silent. Fraud. That was a big word. That was a word that meant serious trouble. Carl's lawyer suddenly stood up. Carl's lawyer, Your Honor, I need a moment to speak with my client. Judge, take your time. Carl and his lawyer started whispering furiously, but at that point, I didn't care. I had already won. Or so I thought. Carl's next move, revenge. A few days later, I was finally starting to relax. I had beaten Carl in court, and he had to pay my legal fees. The nightmare was over. Then, weird things started happening. First, my trash cans disappeared. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe a raccoon knocked them over. Maybe the wind blew them down the street. Then, my car got scratched. Deep, ugly key marks right along the driver's side. Then, my mail started going missing. I checked my security cameras, but whoever was doing it stayed out of view. But I knew it was Carl. And I was right. Catching him, again. One night, I heard a loud thud outside. I grabbed a flashlight, threw on my shoes, and ran to my driveway. Carl was standing there, holding my garbage can over his head, about to throw it into the street. We locked eyes. For a second, we just stared at each other. Then he dropped the trash can and sprinted back to his house. I laughed out loud. He was a grown man. Running away like a child caught stealing cookies. I marched back inside, checked my security cameras, and finally got a clear shot of him. The next morning, I went straight to the police. They took one look at the footage and said, yeah, that's enough for harassment charges. The police pay Carl a visit. I wasn't there when the cops knocked on Carl's door, but according to my neighbor George, it was glorious. Carl refused to open the door at first. Then, when he finally did, he acted confused. Carl, I don't know what you're talking about. Cop, sir, we have you on video vandalizing her property. Carl, that's not me. Cop, sir. We can literally see your face. Carl started stammering, trying to make excuses. But the cops didn't care. They handed him a court summons and told him he'd be facing criminal charges if he didn't knock it off. And that's when things got even crazier. Carl tries to fight back. You'd think after being caught in 2 separate crimes, Carl would finally give up. He didn't. Instead, he started playing the victim. He went around the neighborhood, telling people I was out to get him and spreading lies. He claimed I was editing security footage to frame him. That I was a dangerous woman who wanted to see him ruined. Some neighbors believed him. But most? They knew better. Carl had burned too many bridges. And then, just when I thought I'd seen it all, Carl did something absolutely insane. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of sirens. I looked outside and saw something that made my stomach drop. Carl's shed was on fire. Flames were shooting into the sky. Smoke was billowing over the fence. The fire department was already there, spraying water, shouting orders. And Carl? Carl was standing on his lawn, screaming his head off. Carl, she did this. She did this. She's trying to kill me. I could not believe it. This man, who had been caught on video twice, was now trying to say that I burned down his shed. The cops were already there. And guess what? Carl didn't know that one of my neighbors had a security camera pointed right at his backyard. And the footage? It showed Carl, standing by his shed, holding a gas can. Carl's shed was on fire. The sirens. The smoke. The neighbors standing outside in their pajamas, watching in shock. And Carl? Carl was screaming like a lunatic, pointing at me while firefighters battled the flames. Carl, she did this. She set my property on fire. I stood on my porch, speechless. This man had already tried to scam me, tried to harass me, tried to ruin my reputation, and now he was trying to frame me for arson. But Carl had a big problem. Because, once again, a security camera caught everything. The camera footage that changed everything. At first, the cops took Carl seriously. Arson is no joke. They asked me to step outside, and I did, calmly, because I knew what was coming next. One of my neighbors, Tom, a retired firefighter, walked up with his phone in hand. Tom, officers, you might want to see this. He turned the screen toward them. It was Carl. On camera. Standing next to his shed. Holding a gas can. Carl was seen walking into the shed, coming out a minute later, and then whoosh, flames. Carl set his own shed on fire. Carl's dumbest mistake yet. I will never forget the look on Carl's face when the cops turned to him. One officer crossed his arms. Sir, do you want to explain this? Carl's mouth moved, but no words came out. He looked from me to the cops to the burning remains of his shed. Then he did something so stupid that even the firefighters stopped what they were doing. Carl tried to run. Yes. A grown man, who had already been caught on video multiple times, turned and sprinted down the street. Right into a firefighter's hose. The force of the water hit him square in the chest, knocking him flat on his back. Neighbors burst out laughing. One firefighter actually said, "Well, that's one way to cool off." Carl gasped, flailing on the wet pavement, looking like a drowned rat. The cops were on him in seconds. They hauled him up, soaking wet, and slapped handcuffs on him. And just like that, Carl was arrested. But it wasn't over yet. You'd think that after destroying his own fence, vandalizing my property, and setting his own shed on fire, Carl would finally be done making bad decisions. He wasn't. Carl hired a new lawyer, one of those cheap, billboard ad guys, and decided he was going to sue me again. His claim? I had ruined his life with false accusations. Carl's lawyer sent me another letter, demanding $50,000 for emotional distress and claiming that I had somehow manipulated security footage to frame him. This time, I laughed out loud. Because Carl had already been charged with arson. And then I found out something even better. The hidden secret about Carl. George, my neighbor with the security cameras, knocked on my door one afternoon, holding a thick folder. "George, you're gonna want to see this." He handed me the folder. I opened it and my jaw dropped. Inside were news articles. Court records. Copies of old police reports. Turns out, Carl had done this before. In 3 different states. Scamming neighbors. Fake lawsuits. Destroying his own property for insurance money. And the best part? One of the articles mentioned that Carl was already on probation. That arson charge? It just violated his probation. Meaning? Carl was going to prison. And his lawsuit against me? Completely worthless. Carl's last desperate attempt. A few days before his court date, I got a letter from Carl. Not from a lawyer. From Carl himself. It was handwritten, messy, full of spelling mistakes, and so desperate it was almost sad. Carl, please drop the charges. I'll pay for the fence. I'll pay for everything. Just don't let them send me to jail. Please. I have nowhere else to go. For a second, I actually felt a little bad for him. Then I remembered, this man tried to ruin my life. I didn't respond. And when Carl finally went to court. Well. That's where things got even crazier. Carl's letter sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days. I wasn't sure why I kept it. Maybe part of me wanted to see him squirm. Maybe I was just enjoying the power shift. This was a man who had spent months trying to ruin my life, falsely accusing me, vandalizing my property, even trying to frame me for arson. And now, he was begging. But the thing is, it was too late. The courtroom finale. Carl's final court date came faster than I expected. I arrived early, wanting to get a good seat, but I wasn't alone. Half the neighborhood had shown up. George was there, arms crossed, smirking like he already knew how this was going to end. Tom, the retired firefighter, sat in the back with his arms stretched over the bench, relaxed as if this was free entertainment. Even people I didn't know that well had come, some out of curiosity, some out of pure pettiness. Because at this point, everyone hated Carl. And the only person who looked miserable about being here was Carl himself. The downward spiral. He walked in looking awful. His once cocky stride was gone. His usually pressed shirt was wrinkled. He had bags under his eyes, his hair was a mess, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. Then I saw the real kicker, his lawyer was missing. Carl was representing himself. I almost laughed. I leaned over to George and whispered, "This is going to be fun." George, I'd feel bad for him if he wasn't such an idiot. The judge entered. The room fell silent. And the moment the trial officially began, Carl did what Carl does best, he made things worse. The meltdown. Carl stood up, hands shaking, and started talking. Not to the judge. Not to the jury. To me. "Carl, please, just drop the charges. I can't go to jail. I wasn't thinking straight, all right?" "Judge, Mr. Reynolds, you are speaking to the wrong person." Carl ignored him. "Carl, I was desperate. I lost my job, I didn't know what else to do." Murmurs filled the courtroom. I heard someone whisper, "Lost his job." That was news to me. Then Carl did something none of us saw coming. He started crying. Like, full on, sobbing. "Carl, I needed the money, okay? I thought I could get you to settle, I wasn't trying to ruin your life." I sat there, completely stone-faced. I wasn't falling for this. I had seen this man laugh while I begged him to stop harassing me. I had watched him vandalize my property and lie about it. But Carl wasn't done. He turned to the judge. "Carl, if she drops the charges, can we just end this?" "Judge, Mr. Reynolds, you're not in a position to bargain." Carl broke down even harder. "Carl, I'm gonna lose my house. My car's already been repossessed. I have nothing left." His voice cracked. For the first time since this all started, I saw real fear in his eyes. And for a brief, fleeting second, I felt something. Not sympathy. Not forgiveness. Just exhaustion. The aftermath. The judge handed down the ruling quickly. Carl was found guilty of filing a fraudulent lawsuit. Carl was found guilty of harassment. Carl was found guilty of attempted insurance fraud. And, of course, Carl was found guilty of arson. The moment the final verdict was read, he collapsed into his seat. His entire life was over. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison. And as they walked him out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he glanced at me one last time. "Carl. I never meant for it to go this far." I didn't answer. I just watched as they took him away. The neighborhood moves on. For a few weeks, Carl's house sat empty. Then the bank took it. Then, a few months later, a new family moved in. A young couple with a baby. Sweet people. Quiet. They repainted the front door, put up flower pots, and within a week, it was like Carl had never existed. But every now and then, I'd catch myself staring at the property, remembering all the chaos he had caused. And every time, the same thought crossed my mind, all of this, over a fence. Looking back, I don't feel angry anymore. I don't feel guilty either. I feel relieved. For months, Carl made me feel powerless. He had me looking over my shoulder, second-guessing my own sanity. But in the end, the truth won. And Carl? Carl got exactly what he deserved.